Hi, everybody, and Happy New Year. And New Year's is always a time for a fresh look and a new perspective upon things. And it's also nice to start with a practice together. Particularly, we're doing a practice of breath and meditation, a relatively simple one, so you have time to get absorbed in it. And taking a fresh perspective is kind of my intention for the coming year, and also in anticipation of the course I'm doing with YogaCampus on the theme of being yoga, or about the state of yoga. And today's meditation is focused a little bit more on the state of yoga that the practice brings you into as a state of meditation. And I also wanted to take a few minutes to introduce a few ideas that I think need to be talked about as we kind of take another look at yoga in the new year and what yoga can do for us and how yoga can be useful and appealing to people to draw them into the practice. So I'm kind of looking at the bigger picture in a sense. And certainly yoga does need to be recontextualized as we move through time and through different modes and ways of living. And honestly, that's been the history of yoga throughout, from the Upanishads when they encounter ideas about reincarnation and try to integrate them with ideas from the Vedas, to the Bhagavad Gita, which introduces a very different, more active definition of yoga, and of course Patanjali, and then Tantra. As the whole context of our life changes over time, yoga adjusts to that to make yoga a practice that not only looks to goals of liberation or enlightenment, but also looks to making yoga a practical tool for living well here and now. And that's something we always need to rethink and really consider how well our yoga practice and our understanding of the goals of yoga practice fit the way in which we're actually living and really speak to the goals that we have in living well and fully in this life. As yoga is often taught, it often focuses upon the goal to be attained through practice as kind of the end point, coming to a point of liberation or enlightenment as something to be achieved through the means of the practice. And you get a sense from Patanjali that each limb of yoga is a support or a step or a stage towards achieving that state. But I think we do, in a very practical sense, need to focus upon what the state of yoga is now as a lived experience, however imperfectly realized. Rather than thinking of the state of yoga as something that we ultimately achieve, what does the state of yoga mean to me now? And how can I live it in the present moment, in the now? Understanding that, yes, I'm not fully there, but at the same time, the resources of yoga and the state of yoga are available to me here and now. And in connection with that, we want to look at how the practices of yoga, in whatever mode that we can practice them, support us in maintaining that state, not only while we're doing the practice, but also as we move through our lives off of the mat and into the world. The course and what we're doing today is focusing primarily upon pranayama and its connection with meditation. And certainly there is a whole wealth of new literature, contemporary literature about breath practices and the benefits that breath practices have to offer to us in terms of health and mental clarity, and even different kinds of achievement like athletic achievements. And even much of teaching about pranayama practice tends to focus upon the mechanics of the breath and also alludes to the kinds of benefits that you derive from doing a pranayama practice in terms of health, longevity, mental clarity, and so on. And that focus on the mechanics of the breath, the use of the diaphragm, the chest muscles, different forms of breathing to enhance our capacity for breath. All of that's well and good and helpful. But pranayama in the larger sense is really about fostering a state of awareness. Again, with Patanjali, you get a sense that it's kind of a preparation for the practice of concentration, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. But with later tantrics, pranayama is part and parcel of being in a state of yoga in the midst of whatever activity that you're performing, with their emphasis upon jivan mukti, upon living in a liberated state in the here and now. The deeper practices of pranayama that I want to speak to, in addition to the mechanics of the breath really are meant to speak to that. What state does that put us into such that we're fully present to what's happening in our lives and are able to respond to that in the best or most constructive way, in a way that's both fulfilling for us and for the people we're dealing with or our environment. Pranayama is meant to foster that sense of community, if you will, a kind of spiritual community with your surroundings, with your life as it is. And it is helpful to add a contemporary context to that. And that context often involves a deeper understanding of the nervous system and the role it plays in experiencing yogic states. That's often connected to what we experience through asana in conjunction with the breath as well. So yoga does need to support that state in the sense of supporting our health. And health includes mental clarity, cognitive clarity, even emotional steadiness and emotional clarity. All of that is part and parcel of what we might call the state of yoga. Now, I think a glaring deficiency, or what's kind of not keeping up with our evolving understanding of yoga, which is important to discuss in connection with the state of yoga, is the whole role of moral philosophy. We certainly often allude to principles like the yamas and niyamas from Patanjali and ideas about dharma from the Bhagavad Gita, all of which get folded into more contemporary understandings or discussions of yoga and hatha yoga as part and parcel of that. And at the same time, what we're carrying forward from moral philosophy from previous philosophies, I don't think really serve our understanding of the state of yoga. And I just wanted to throw out a couple ideas, which obviously need to be discussed much later, but to give you a sense of the kind of picture of yoga I'm thinking of. First of all, with Patanjali, which is who's most often alluded to in terms of yamas and niyamas as the foundation for a moral philosophy. Certainly, many of the ideas are non-controversial, like non-harming or ahimsa. That's certainly part and parcel of moral awareness. But with Patanjali himself, my question is always how useful that foundation is for real moral philosophy, especially because I kind of question how much Patanjali's presentation of the yamas and niyamas is really a moral philosophy at all. It's a little bit more of an exit strategy. It's a strategy or a method of making choices that you use in order to achieve liberation or moksha, or liberation from participating in life as it is. It's really kind of more the terms for a severance package from living rather than a genuine guideline to living in community with others. Again, that can be the opening to a large discussion, but it's worth thinking about because the state of yoga, which I think gets emphasized in Tantra more, is a sense of how our yogic state is in communion with others rather than in isolation from, or a state of kaivalya or separation from community with others. And what needs to get added into the awareness of yoga, which would be more supportive to maintaining a yogic state in the lives that we live, is an appreciation of the values of community and balancing individual agency, integrity, responsibility, or in other words, conscience, with the values that are fostered in and through community. And this is always a hard balance to strike. And this is where the difficulties or challenges of a moral philosophy, particularly for a yogi, need to come in. You get a sense of this from the Bhagavad Gita because you do get a sense in working out the moral situation that Arjuna finds himself in. He needs to talk it out with Krishna. There's a recognition that we can't achieve moral clarity for ourselves very often, however clear our principles are. We need to talk it out in order to come to an understanding of what the best choice is for the sake of the self as well as the community. Unfortunately, in the dialogue, Krishna kind of pulls rank on Arjuna and starts to introduce an idea of dharma and duty and what he must do in keeping with the position of his caste. In a sense, kind of railroads the conclusion to the foreordained conclusion that Krishna is seeking. What I find interesting in the beginning is how Arjuna starts with a real crisis of conscience and with a real understanding and appreciation of Dharma as being community, because his concern in the choice that's being presented to him is both a concern for his own conscience, for his own karmic well-being, if you will, but at the same time, that's intimately tied to the health of the community in which he lives. And he recognizes that the act that he's being called upon to perform will be destructive to the community and tear the fabric of the community. And he clearly recognizes that no good can come of that, either for him as an individual or for the community as a whole. And that understanding of Dharma in terms of the values of community and the individual in community kind of get left behind fairly quickly in the dialogue. And I think that's something that we need to come back to and explore, because it's really an operant question, both for yoga teachers and the ethical context of teaching yoga and the relationships, the dynamics between teacher and student, and also the relationship between the yogi and the community as a whole, where if we're following our yoga, we're actually meant to foster the values of community, which include valuing others as well as valuing our own conscience and finding a balance between the two. That's really a question of practical wisdom. That's not something that you can lay out in advance in terms of principles like yamas and niyamas or rules for choice making. You can lay out principles and values, but how you work out the application and balancing of those values is something that's worked out in community with each other. And I think that's kind of a vista of yoga that needs to be explored, because again, it's part and parcel of the yogic state. And if we don't honor those moral concerns, then it's not really supportive of any kind of state of yoga that we look to achieve for ourselves or any good that we look to achieve for the community. So there's a lot to talk about in connection with yoga and the yogic state, and how we're meant to bring yoga into our contemporary times, 2026, looking onwards, in a way that's going to be meaningful to people and actually productive in moving forward in maintaining the moral health of the community, and with that, the health of the individual. So all of these are parts of topics that I really look forward to thinking through and talking about in community with you in the year to come. But to look at doing a practice for the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to start with some basic ideas about the breath, touching upon some ideas that are part of the tradition, but not necessarily emphasized in pranayama, and to do a basic breath practice or dharana, which is really quite the central dharana or the central breath practice that's kind of an initiation in Tantra, which is bringing your focus or awareness to the movement of the breath through the central channel of the body, which is described as the Sushumna. So I want to lay out a couple of basic ideas to kind of see how the focus of the practice draws us into a state of awareness or a state of meditation, and is more than simply a breathing practice that brings balance to the body and a state of calm. One thing I wanted to point out too is emphasis upon nasal breathing, breathing through the nose, and the value and importance of that. There are a lot of health benefits that go with that are too many to go into right now. But an interesting thing is to think about the disciplines called Swara Yoga, where Swara Yoga refers to how the breath flows through the nostrils and how the flow of the breath through the nostrils has a subtle influence upon the state of concentration or awareness that we experience. And it's often described in terms of the predominance of different elements, or the kind of rasa qualities of the elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. I think it actually touches upon a structural truth about the nose, which is within the nostrils, we have bones that are constructed that are called turbinates. And there are like 3 levels of that in different parts of the nose going through the sinuses. And the bones are constructed in such a way, a sort of nautilus spiral, in such a way that the breath flows through the nostrils and the sinuses in a sort of spiraling turban-like fashion that both warms the breath, filters the breath, but also activates the nervous system in different ways. There's a lower turbinate down at the bottom edge of the nose, and then there are upper levels of turbinates to the midpoint and the upper part going into the sinuses. And you can actually direct the breath into different parts of the nostril in these different turbinates, and this can affect the state that you experience. For example, the bottom edge of the nose is associated with the element of water, which is cooling and calming and kind of speaks to the second chakra. And so in environments that's very vata, like perhaps you're experiencing right now in winter, when you focus on the bottom rim of the nostril, it has more of a calming quality of water, which works against this sort of aggravating dryness of winter air. And by the same token, as the breath moves towards the middle of the nostril, it's more the element of earth or grounding. So we're going to focus on the flow of the breath through the nostril. It being winter, I'm introducing this idea of the bottom edge of the nostril as being a kind of calming focus. And the basic practice of the Dvadashanta is an awareness of the flow of the breath, both on the inhalation and the exhalation. And Dvadashanta refers to the space of 12, which is measured in terms of finger breadths. And so the idea with the first Dvadashanta is on the exhalation, imagine your breath proceeding out a distance of 12 finger breadths, or in other words, 4, 8, 12 finger breadths to a point right about here level with the heart. That's called the Bhoga Dvadashanta, or the Dvadashanta of the body, the physical body. The inhalation also comes in 4, 8, 12 finger breadths to a point in the center of the heart. This is referred to more as the Madhya Dasha, or the place of the middle, rather than an actual Dvadashanta. But the breath becomes balanced as you focus on the breath moving between these two locations with a little pause between each movement of the breath. That brings you to a state of mental focus, kind of a first stage of dharana. The second Dvadashanta is the breath becomes more subtle and you experience it as moving more along the spine through the diaphragm down to the pelvic floor, also directing the breath upwards through the back of the throat, a space called the talu, until in a subtle way, as the breath moves through the sinuses, it's as if the breath travels to the crown of the head. This is a second Dvadashanta, which is 4, 8, 12 finger breadths to a point right here at the top of the head. This is the Shakti Dvadashanta, also Nasikya Dvadashanta, where Nasik refers to the nose, the distance from the nose. But it's a place of power and steadiness that's experienced at the Sahasrara, the crown of the head. This leads to the third Dvadashanta, which is 4, 8, 12 finger breadths to a point above the crown of the head, which I like to think of as sort of like a star shining in the sky above the head. This is the Shiva Dvadashanta, the place of transcendent consciousness. And this takes you into the state of meditation, which is both transcendent of the body, but also inclusive of everything. It's a kind of blue pearl of energy, and the whole universe is contained within that point of light, just as every point in the universe is full of that single point of light. So I'm going to talk you through this little meditation practice on the Dvadashanta and see the kind of state of meditation that brings you into it. So I invite you to take a nice upright posture. To align the head, it's helpful to take your hand behind your head and tip your head back a little bit so your head comes more in line with the spine. And then gently draw up with the hand so you feel your head slide back into your hand and upwards till you feel tall and light through the crown of the head. This opens up the back of the throat to the breath. And by the same token, you can let the tip of the tongue rest at the roof of the mouth, gently pressing up behind the back of the teeth. That allows the back of the tongue to relax, opening space for the breath, and the jaw relaxes down and forward. So there's a sense of breathing with a feeling of space at the back of the throat, a warmth to the eyes. And the head itself feels spacious for the breath to move. And you can bring your attention first to the feeling of the flow of the breath through the nostrils. As you breathe in, following the breath into the center of the heart with the in-breath, where it pauses for a moment. And then the breath flows naturally up and out with the out breath. You can imagine with the out breath, the breath extends 4, 8, 12 finger breaths, dissolving into space at the end of the out breath. It dissolves and disappears for a moment, and then reappears from that space, and you receive the breath into the heart. Each breath in is a receiving of the breath into the heart, where the breath pauses in stillness. And the breath out rises from that space, flows out through the nose, and dissolves into the Dvadashanta, the space in front of you. And the mind also rests and dissolves in that space. As you focus on that flow of the breath, be aware of the sensation of the breath in the nostrils. See how you can bring your attention down to the bottom edge, the bottom rim of the nostril, feeling the coolness of the in-breath. And the gentle warmth of the out-breath as it flows over the upper lip and dissolves into space in the Dvadashanta. This first stage of practice brings balance between the experience of the in-breath and the out-breath, the inner world of the heart, and the outer world, which is also a manifestation of the heart. The breath brings us into a feeling of balance between the inner self, the inner I, and the outer self, the self that moves in the world. As we find balance and harmony between the inner I and the outer I, we can focus more upon the space of the heart. Imagining in the center of the heart, there's a flower like a lotus. The in-breath draws you into the center of the flower, placing yourself seated in the center of the flower. With the out-breath, that flower blossoms and opens. Each breath out, an expansion and opening of the heart. Sometimes upon the breath, you can hear the sound hum on the in-breath, centering you in the heart. And the soft sigh of the out-breath, sa, on the out-breath, the heart relaxing and opening. We can take the breath deeper, imagining the flower has a stem extending down to the base of the spine, taking root in the earth. As you inhale, it's as if the breath is drawn down into the roots, as if the earth is inhaling through you. On the breath out, imagine the breath rising from the roots through the stem to the crown of the head, as if the flower now rests at the crown of the head and blossoms and opens with the out-breath. The feeling of sa. Feel the breath to be a subtle thread along the center of the spine. Gently descending into the roots with hum. Rising through the center, blossoming at the crown of the head with sa. And opening the flower like a soft shimmering of light over the crown of the head. Here there's a feeling of light, fullness, illumination at the crown of the head, as if your eyes are full of that light. And the mind is relaxed and full of light. As you follow the breath from the roots to the blossoming flower, imagine or picture emerging from the center of that flower a tiny blue star that gradually rises to a place somewhere above the head, like a blue pearl above you, a radiant star. As you inhale, you drink in the light of that star, letting it fill the body. With the exhalation, the mind rises and merges into that star. Feeling that the whole universe is illuminated by that star, contained within the light of that star. And at the same time, you're in a place beyond the mind, beyond the body, steady and clear. Sometimes the sound of the breath subtly shifts, coming in with the feeling of so, and rising, expanding as the radiant star with the feeling of hum, I am. And the state of yoga is this feeling of both immanence, being within the body, within the mind, within the world, and transcendence at the same time. Steady, clear, present yet undisturbed. And the breath is repeating, I am that. I am that state now and always. Hum and sa. That state is me, so is hum. Remaining steady within yourself, imagine the star beginning to descend. Entering the center of the flower, you feel its touch at the crown of the head as the petals gently close. And a drop of that light descends within to the level of the eyes, becoming the light that shines through the eyes. In the throat, that light becomes the cool moonlight, cool and radiant, the sweetness of speech. In the heart, that light is the warm, expansive sun. In the navel, that light becomes a flame, the clarity of mind and will and intention. And the lower belly becomes a calm, clear lake, the clarity of emotion, of feeling. And below that, in the hips, the legs, that light becomes the physical body, shining like pure gold. Once you're fully in the body once again, you can let yourself gently sway from side to side, letting go of any tension in the body. And let that swaying gradually reduce, becoming less and less until the physical body becomes still. And there's still a sense of that swaying energy within. This is the inner inspiration of the prana, the kundalini, the very heart of consciousness. When you're ready, you can softly open your eyes, bring your hands together in front of your heart, and bow your head to your own heart and to that light within. and namaste. Happy New Year to you.